Hi, I'm Caroline Leavitt. I'm the co-founder of Blaze, the book initiative that was started in the pandemic to help authors, readers, and independent bookstores. And I'm so thrilled today to have Jennifer Murphy here. She is the author of this amazing book, Scarlet in Blue, which I was telling her before we got on that I actually read twice. The first time as a reader because I couldn't stop reading it, and the second time as a student because I wanted to see how she did what she did. Scarlet and Blue, let me just read you the starred book list. Murphy dazzled. This novel will lead readers questioning what is real and how mental health can affect generations in kaleidoscopic ways. Luminous writing, while those who enjoy a plot-driven mystery will also find what they are looking for. Bookless, starred. Welcome, Jennifer. I'm so thrilled to have you here.
Really great to be here. Thank you.
You're welcome. I want to tell the people watching that if you have questions, don't be shy. Put them in the chat and we'll ask them. Also, bookshop.org, you can buy Jennifer's book and you can buy her first novel as well. So let's talk about the book. This book is about, it's a mother and daughter book about a mother who, and there's a lot of may or may not be. It's about a mother and daughter book, and they're fleeing. And they're fleeing a mysterious figure called him. The mother may or may not be mentally ill. There may or may not be a him. There's also a very deep mystery about what happened long ago in Scarlet's life. And as Scarlet seems to be descending into madness more and more, Blue seems to be channeling out her own life. It's just terrific. And it's also sectioned in terms of a murder, and we don't know what it is until the very end. So what I want to know is what I always want to know is what was haunting you or obsessing you when you started this novel? What was the question that you were sort of writing your way to an answer for?
Well, for a while there, I've been moving a lot, and so that has kind of been. I wouldn't say traumatic for me, but it definitely has kind of kept me on my feet. And this whole idea of moving became kind of obsessive for me because of what it does to a person, how it uproots you, and then you put down roots somewhere else, but you know you're not going to be there long. So it's this real sort of push pull in life, and so that's kind of what I was thinking about. But I also have a background in art. I have a painting. I have an MFA in painting, and I I just love art, and I love Renoir, and I love Seurat and Matisse, and and I had gone to the when my other book hadn't really come out yet. It was 2014, and the other book was coming out very soon. And I'd gone to the Chicago Art Institute, and there was an exhibit up that was of Renoir. Um, Two portraits were hanging kind of side by side, and one was, I thought it was beautiful. And then I looked to the right, and then there was what they were calling a digitized reproduction of it, and it was just brilliant. The colors were totally different. And then I read the language on the wall, and this is in the book where you experience this exhibit kind of in the book, but it told the story of fugitive pigment, and this was really strange.
Just going to ask you that. Go ahead.
Because the title of the book that was in my head about the mother and daughter on the run was called Fugitive Pigment at the time. And I'm like, no way, this is too weird. So I read about it, and I thought and it even fits. And I'm kind of a believer, in that kind of meant to be, and, Jungian
Right.
synchronicity and all that. And so I'm looking at this, and I'm thinking, this is what my characters in my head are going through. They're kind of running from this phantom so-called man that we don't know if he's real or not. But and the daughter is, and this wasn't even on paper yet, but I do that. I have my whole thing is kind of in my head before I even allow myself to hit the page. And so I'm thinking, this feeling of moving a lot makes you feel kind of like you're disappearing into the world and nobody knows you exist. It's a very strange, you kind of start. I mean, I have friends from early on that I've kept over time, but as I moved and I've made very few new friends. So it was like anything could happen and no one would know, that I'm gone.
Right.
It's a very
That's
strange kind of not grounded feeling. And that's what I wanted to write about, these two that were running, and then to see this exhibit, and I thought, yep, this is perfect because that's what fugitive pigment is. It's paint that runs basically.
there's such a wealth of art information and artistry, and every time it came up, it had something to do with the characters, which I thought was brilliant in a very sort of natural, subtle way. Like the mother's always teaching the daughter art terms, and she starts talking about pentimento, how under layers there are other things, and that definitely can be applied to the characters.
Mhm,
And I just also there are certain paints which I didn't realize are poisonous to
mm,
ingest, and that's very much a part of what's going on. But you also tell us a whole lot about music
mhm.
and creativity in terms of music too. When did that get added in? And do you play?
I took piano, but I'm not by any means a concert pianist like the character is. Um, but and this is a really strange thing. The whole time I was starting to write, and that didn't come in right away, but as I was starting to write, I kept hearing Beethoven, I kept hearing the Andante, and I was like, why am I hearing this? So I decided to honor it, and that's really what it was. And it was that simple. But also, they needed to both, in my mind, be artists. That was very important to me, but they couldn't be the same type of artist. That was also, and I didn't want to have a writer. I wanted to have something that was, and I don't mean to say that we're not beautiful when we write, but I wanted something really beautiful. And music to me is so beautiful. So, and especially, long hair music or classical music. And so I thought, okay, this is what she's going to be, and it was so fun. I had to do research, but it was very fun.
What surprised you the most about the research with
Well,
music?
most of the hardest research I did was trying to get into 1968. That was difficult. I mean, because it's like, being accurate really mattered to me, and
Yeah.
and I didn't want anybody to come back and say, "Oh, that didn't happen in 1968," or "This is you're way off," or whatever. And so I was very, very conscientious in terms of making sure that I had 1968 right. But then something happened, and it was maybe the third draft. It was already with my editor, my main editor, Maya, who I've got to plug right now because she's the best, Maya Ziv. And but we were just editing away, having a great time, and I realized that, and I don't even remember. I think it was like a secondary edit. Sometimes how you get like a second or a third editor that's
Right.
looking at tighter things, and she said, that's not how you can't just, on the machines, I forget what they're called right now. I'm having a hard time. It's not like a computer. You just can't look up something on one
Right.
of these library machines. And I'm like, oh my God. And that, that was kind of one of those moments where I kind of, didn't write for 2 days as I like thought, oh my God, this is bad. So I had to go back in and really research how, those worked. And that, kind of, and I actually, through someone that I know in this town, South Haven, who knew the person that used to be the director of the library there, I asked her, how do these work? How do I find out it? Is it through, a card catalog? And oh my God, it was just, and I started thinking in 1968, life was pretty tough, in
Oh,
comparison to
yeah.
what we have now as writers. All we do is like click on and research something. But
How did the structure come together? You mentioned earlier that you like puzzles, and I wrote this down in big letters, puzzles, because
mhm,
this book is like it's part psychological thriller, but it's also very literary. And nothing is what it seems, which I loved. And there's a certain structure. We have a bunch of voices that speak. We have Scarlet, we have Blue, and we have Henry, a psychologist. And you're also moving back and forth in time, like 2 years before the murder, or 46 years after the murder. And yet it's seamless. So as a reader, I love that. I was just breathless reading it because it all attached so closely together. And as a
Oh, wow.
writer, my question is, how did
That's
you
good.
do that?
Um, I love it. I love, trying to make things, fit like in a puzzle, and that's the kind of things I like to read, and even movies that I like to watch. I really love that, and I mean, I wouldn't say it was simple. I mean, it wasn't really simple. I had to think about it a lot, and I had to carry a lot in my head. Like, I had to, remember, a lot. And, as I was going back and forth, and I did it, sequentially. I didn't like everything was sequential as I went through. So I had to really be present in the writing and remember what I wrote. And um, I,
Wait, I just want to stop you and understand. You said everything was sequential because the book is bouncing around in time.
right.
So when you wrote it first, it was this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. Wow.
Yeah, so I started with,
Okay.
as it, you read the book. So I started, with the, well, the very beginning, which is the end. And, but then I went to, 2014, and then I went back to 1968, and then 2014 and 1968. And the 2014 sections are, they're smaller. They're just kind of, she's in the museum and she's looking at this exhibit that we talked about. But I needed to do it sequentially because it had to flow. I mean, you couldn't just
Right.
write 2014 and then come back and stick things in there. It had to be, because she would be, Blue, as now an adult pianist, would have to be responding to what we just read in a way that was fluid. So yes, I wrote it sequentially. And I did, have to do it more than once. I'm not saying it worked on the first draft. It did
Right.
not.
Right.
I,
Right.
it was, I had to go through and work on it. And then it became like the puzzle of it became, I mean, I thought, like, am I getting Alzheimer's or something? Because, my memory was just like, wait a minute, did I already say this? And that's the issue when you write something more than once, because you read it again and you think, I did I already say this? But I didn't. I would think because I was just reading it so much. And um, so yeah, it was challenging, but it was also absolutely thrilling to do, because it was, when it started to come together, it was the best feeling in the world. It was like, oh my God, this is working. It's starting to come together now. Um,
So you didn't have an outline when you started?
no, I
You
don't do outlines,
you
but
don't do outlines.
but I
Okay.
do structure in my head. I mean, like,
In your
I
head.
know where I'm
Okay.
going structurally, and I also would say, like, plot wise, like, I know where I'm starting the story plot, and I know, where my arc is, and I know where my plot is ending, but I don't necessarily know, um, the exact ending. Like, I don't
I
know.
was gonna ask you about that because
Yeah.
your ending is amazing. It literally pulls everything out from under you, and yet you always want an ending that's inevitable and yet totally surprising, and that's what it was. And what also I don't wanna give away any plot, but what also thrilled me so much about the ending is it was just infused with love.
Mm.
I felt like my heart was cracking open. So I
Well,
want to talk a little bit more about how Blue and Scarlet approach art because they approach their art very differently. At one point, Scarlet says, "You know what? You'll do your art, and then you'll envy those who live." Who don't do
mhm.
their art. You'll resent the very thing you once loved. It will become your master. You will surrender. And she's not saying it as a good thing.
Mhm.
And what's so interesting is that Blue doesn't feel that way. Can you talk about that? I thought I actually wanted to underline that in the book, but I didn't want to put ink in the book, so I didn't.
Well, I think that for Scarlett, it was that. She had boundary issues all along.
Oh, yeah.
When she would cross into the other world of painting, she sometimes had a really hard time coming back. And I have had that experience. So I know that experience. I was talking to somebody recently, yesterday actually, and I was saying, like, when I'm writing, and especially this book, I make sure that, I don't go walk for 2 hours after I've stopped writing, because I'm still in that other world. I'm afraid I'm gonna cross the street when I shouldn't. And so that, for Scarlett, is what she has, that bad. She has that sort of breaking on the edge of, kind of brilliance in her medium, but at the same time, Van Gogh-esque for lack of a, kind of a stereotype. But um, and Blue is like in so many ways the purest of artists. She loves art. She's like, and I've experienced that too. So in a way, they were kind of parts of me, in that respect. But Blue, just kind of loved playing, loved hearing, loved it. It was joyous, and her mother didn't understand that. She didn't get that. And so yes, that scene was. I love that you point out that scene, because that was a very important scene to me to
Oh
point out
yeah,
differences.
that
And
made me stop. That
yeah.
made me stop. I also want to point out, because you also stopped me again when you said that you can't walk after writing for a while because you're in the other world. I think every writer out there listening will understand it. It's
Mhm.
like you're living two realities,
Right. Right.
two worlds. I mean, I happen to love that state, but it can be, you have to be careful about the boundaries
Mhm.
bleeding into each other.
Right.
But I love that you said that. I thought that was absolutely great. So let's talk a little bit more. Do you think that, Blue is a talented pianist and Scarlett is a talented painter? Why do you think that sometimes being really creative and dedicated to art gets us in trouble? Do you think it's the art that does it, or do you think that we're already predisposed to, have depression or mental illness or anxiety, and that's why we create, because creating actually nurtures us?
I actually think the latter, to be honest. I think that we are artists, depending on what we decide to do with it, or where we feel like we can best, you know, kind of that outlet. What's the outlet that works the best for us to do that? And I'm probably speaking for myself, but I would imagine that most writers feel that way. I'm not positive, but I just think that we know that that's the one thing. I mean, it's so funny when I don't write or when I don't paint, and I still paint a lot. And when I don't, I just find myself getting, kind of depressed. It's the weirdest feeling. And I'm not really, I don't consider myself a depressed person, but at the same time, I just get like I start getting bored and or just slightly depressed, and then it dawns on me I haven't, I've allowed myself to kind of spiral away from what I love best. And so then I make myself come back in, and I'm like, oh, thank God, I came back. And I do believe that, when we're lost in those worlds that we go to create art, it is very hard sometimes to come back out, and it's also very hard to get back in, which that was,
Sometimes.
yeah, which is sometimes, and that's kind of what Scarlett was talking. Actually, Blue says that about Scarlett. She watches her and says, the kind of that madness,
Right.
and that is like, Vincent van Gogh, or when, because those, I don't know if he was already mad, but I believe um, he was probably more like Scarlett in terms of that type of artist that just, was let it consume her, rather than control it. And so
Yeah, I totally agree with you. If I don't write for a few days, I don't get depressed, but I get really anxious and I start to
mm,
spin. And the weird thing is, like you, it takes me a minute to realize, why is this happening? And then I
right.
realize I need to write,
Mhm.
just like I need to exercise. I need to go in that world for a while and replenish and then come out again.
Mhm.
I want to talk about names. Names have
Okay.
huge importance in this book. I love it. First of all, there's him in capital letters, the man who is stalking them, and we don't know who he is or if he's alive or not, or a figment of her imagination. Blue chooses her name from a box of crayons, which I loved at every new place. Scarlet is her mother. So, why did you? That's been really fun, first of all, to write that with all the names, but can you talk about the significance of the names for these people and why you choose to put that in the novel?
Well, the book to me, because it's an art book, color just seemed very important to me, just in general, all the way through the book. If you look, that's a sort of a theme. There's color everywhere, and there's either faded color, or there's bright color, or there's, it has a lot to do with their moods, and or what's happening, and kind of I use it to make it, it kind of it can be used like as tension sometimes too, to the reds, and the reds are very important. And the reds, for Renoir, he loved red. That was his favorite color. So that I had to kind of go there too. And murder, is a small little part of this. So that, that's red. So that was a very important color. But
Right.
the crayon thing is, I wanted them to have names that we could somehow, and I didn't think of the crayon thing right away. It was one of those things as I was writing that I thought, oh, let's do this, and but it was that way. There was always a connection between them. Like, you always knew that even if they had different names, that they were somehow connected names. And poor Blue, I just, I felt really bad for her a lot, because, she tells us that one time about all her past names and her stomach aches and all
I
that kind of
know.
stuff. And she's got she's so lighthearted in some ways, and so heavy in other ways. So the crayons just felt like the right way for me to do it. And I actually got on eBay and searched out a box of 64 crayons from 1968. So I have
Oh,
the,
how fun.
because the colors are different now. They're not the same colors, and I wanted to get
Really?
it right too. So,
Wow.
you know, um, but I don't know. And Scarlett's name had to be Scarlet, and so that
Right, right.
started me
That's
thinking
appropriate.
that but it needed to be specifically Scarlet. So that was also kind of where that started. And so
I want to encourage everybody out there, if you have questions, don't be shy, pop them up in the chat. I want to ask you about the love story between Scarlet and Blue. I mean, it's tortured. There's traumatic things happening, but at the base of it, they're sort of the directions change. At the first part of the book, the direction is Scarlet is starting to go downhill, while Blue is she finds friends, she loves music, she loves the piano. And then towards the end, they start to, I don't want to give anything away, but they start to find their way to what I would call common ground, which is they love each other. They
mhm.
just weren't doing that love well. Did you always know that it was a love story in a sense?
Well, okay, so I was a single mom, and for many years, for several years, and I had that with my daughter. I mean, it was, as you go through it, or as I was going through it, I knew I was really happy in that relationship. I was very happy in that relationship, but I didn't really understand how kind of enmeshed we were. Like, we were practically one, not two people. And I mean, it talk about joy. I mean, just seeing her every day made me just, I was so in love with her in so many ways. And and our relationship was kind of where I started that. I mean, obviously there wasn't that kind of trauma in our lives, and there was very little bad. But when she was 15, and I specifically remember when she started, kind of separating from me, and how destroyed I was. It was just,
It's
I was,
it's totally hard. My son is 25 and
oh
I
God, yeah.
just
And
man,
they used to be our babies, and then they were and I mean, we did everything together, and she's an artist, and we loved art together, and we loved it was just. And I had to travel for work. I was doing master plans around the country, and I would travel for work, and I always brought her with me. And the schools were just great about it. They would just give her these, assignments, like go to the museum and write a research paper, or go here. And so we started doing those kind of things together, just so she could go on these trips. And it was just, anyway. So that's kind of where, I mean, that love, we all have that, but when you're a single parent, it's like the only real love in your life.
yeah.
And so it's, and there was just her and I. It's not like there were three. I wasn't a single parent of, more than one. I had just the one. And it was a girl. So it was like this perfect, I mean, how could it be any, we were the same. And, so
I know,
when
it's amazing.
yeah, and so when I was writing
You
about, Scarlet and Blue, I was just like, "This is who they are." But then, Scarlet had issues, so it became, she was much, stronger, and I didn't I mean, I wasn't like that. So it was, I was just always happy to be around Maddie, and then, but we didn't have to hide. The whole idea of playing the piano and not being able to have the neighbors hear was just, another real hard thing when that came to me. That would have been a horrible thing to grow up with. So,
Oh, you have a question. This is from Emily Canders. Is there anything that was in the first manuscript that was hard to take out in future edits? Great question.
oh, say it again. Is there any? Oh, I can
Okay, I'm
read
sorry. Is there?
Yes. Well, this is really okay. So I have to just tell now what happened. But when Maya first picked up the book, she had it had other people read it as they do, and I actually had the hymn was a priest back then, and that was something that wasn't
Oh,
working very well. And that was a go back to the table in my mind, and that was a hard change because it was throughout the whole book. I mean, so it was like it touched everywhere, and so I had to really do this huge rewrite and change what he was. And and they were right; they were totally right. Afterwards, it's when we're asked to do something that we're already attached to, it's kind of hard to stand back and sometimes, listen. And then when I was like, no, this was totally right. That was it was a much better move. So, um, but, and I don't know. I mean, everything else there was nothing else that was really hard for me. I mean, in terms of, there were little things that were, changed, obviously, but, nothing that I regret that's not there. I don't even regret that's not there, but you know, it was, that's a great question. Thank
it
you.
is a great question. I always want to know stuff like that. What made you want to be a writer, and when did you start writing?
Always. I've always been a writer, and, so, when I was growing up, my brother is a few years older than me, and he was a writer. He wanted to be a writer, and, I would write all the time, but I never told anybody because that was his thing. And, um so when I went into art, like I got my MFA in painting and I started doing these master plans, I kind of went into the, even though I still paint, what I had to do, I had to have a living. I was single.
Right.
And so I started writing these master plans, and I would I would make these plans that were just so beautiful. Like I would do all this research, and they would be like this whole thing about the history of place, and I was like, what am I doing? I need to just write a book. And so that's kind of how that came.
I also want to talk about, I'm sorry, I'm writing down a note to myself. I also want to talk about the role of mental illness or trauma in the book. It was never really, well, I don't want to give anything away. I was going to ask, do you think she was mentally ill or it was just trauma? I guess I want to ask you, how do you think that people get through trauma in their life? And do you think that trauma can be inherited? I mean, Blue turns out okay,
Yeah. At least we
but there
hope.
are moments where for the moment, but she worries about this.
Yeah, I mean, schizophrenia is hereditary often. So yes, I mean, so when I was living in Seattle, our neighbor was schizophrenic, and I watched him become, and hopefully he's not watching this, but I watched him become, change very slowly over time, and that's where Scarlet came from, watching what he became. And I it was just traumatizing for everybody that lived in the neighborhood. I mean, things would happen in the middle of the night, these crazy things would happen. And I knew him when he wasn't schizophrenic, how fast it came on. And so, and then he ultimately lost his house. So it is just very deteriorating, and there's nothing you can do. And but I don't know if his family, if it was hereditary in his family. I know his mother was still alive. We met her, um, but yes, I think that's a horrible, debilitating disease. And when Scarlett had it, it was long before medication. I mean, there wasn't the medication that we have now to combat it. So,
Well, I want to say that even the medication we have now, I don't think it's totally terrific.
right.
I had the same experience where when I first moved to New York, the person who lived across the hall from me was the strongest woman I ever knew. I mean, we were both really young. And she was fabulous and smart and this and that. And after about 6 years of knowing her, she started to get paranoid. She thought somebody was tapping her phone.
Oh
She
no.
went out to California, and she called me from California, and she was very calm. And she said, the cops stopped me when I was on the freeway. I'm in a mental institution now. I don't know what's going on. Will you get me a lawyer? And I got a lawyer, and I did all this stuff because she sounded calm. And then her doctor called me, and he said, look, she's had a psychotic break. She's schizophrenic. We got her she was found on the highway driving the wrong way because she thought
Mm,
FBI agents were against her, and she thinks we're spying on her and all this stuff. She's had a lot of different medications, and I still talk to her. She's in a place now, and she has good days and bad days. And the thing that was so interesting about your book in terms of mental illness is how it impacts others
mhm,
around you. You have everyone suffers. Everyone suffers. And I thought
mhm.
you captured that so really beautifully. I want to ask you if you would mind reading a passage.
Ooh, um,
I'm sorry, I didn't prepare you for that. You don't have to if you don't want
what,
to.
do you have, like, a specific, thing you'd like me to read, or is there something?
I want you just to read a passage you love.
Um, oh gosh, I'd have to find it, but,
Or you can read the first page. You know what?
I'll
You can
just
read
do
the
that.
first page.
Why don't I read? I'll start with I won't read the well, I can read the opening, and then maybe I'll go into because we're gonna read, what, 2 2.5 pages? Okay.
That's great.
Okay. So this is the beginning, this is the murder, and the book starts just, like, kind of in a forward 19 it's called September 1968, um, and this is, Scarlett actually talking. We don't find that out right away, but it's not giving anything away. "We killed him today. It was more difficult than I had imagined, not the gory part. I relished watching the blood ooze from his flesh, the lifting and dragging. He was heavy. Now I paint. The book on Impressionism lies open to the portrait by Renoir. I can't remember Madame Umber looking so real, so alive. Everything is alive, me, my surroundings, my canvas. Light drenches the room. Sheer curtains flutter and soar. My senses are crazy sharp. Distant waves roll and splash. A hummingbird's wings tick like a clock. Apron strings brush my bare flesh. The scents, a pungent stew of turpentine, linseed oil, and corpse. My palette, a sea of glorious reds, scarlets and roses, carmines and crimson. I can't help but swirl my fingers through the gooey mixture. I study my canvas, compare it to Renoir's Madame. Poor thing, her reds had faded long ago, but I tell her not to worry, because now I can fix that. So I can go into the pianist, and this is pretty short too. This is like,
Okay, read this, please.
okay, so
It's
this is just
beautiful.
maybe like, a page and a half at the most. I see her there sometimes inside that frozen wave, floating, white nightgown billowing, blonde hair swirling. Sometimes she's holding the knife she used to slit his throat. Sometimes it's she who is dead. When the bad images come, I try to replace them with the good. Her smile, her playful spontaneity, the particular choreography of her body when she applied paint to canvas. But these attempts don't always work. It's cold and windy today, as it is most winter days in Chicago. Symphony practice just broke for lunch. I listened to Vivaldi through my newfangled earmuffs, a birthday gift to myself for a number I'd rather not discuss, as I crossed Michigan Avenue. Who knew that one day they'd put miniature speakers inside fur? Like always, I slow my pace as I near the Art Institute. I never enter it, yet I choose to walk by it every day. I tell myself I prefer the wide sidewalk that fronts it, admire its Beaux-Arts architecture, appreciate the large green lion statues that flank its grand entrance, but I know those aren't the real reasons. I glance at the colorful exhibition banners. They don't change much, every few months or so, but I see there's a new one. I try to make out the lettering. Squint. Renoir's True Colors. My heart beats fast and loud. I read the banner again to make sure. It is the exact title my mother had used for a lesson she gave me that final year on the little known art term, fugitive pigment. Then, just like that, I'm propelled forward. I cross the plaza, pass under the arched doorways, file through the ticket line, wander along the maze of halls displaying works by Van Gogh and Matisse and Seurat until I stand before duplicate paintings of Pierre Auguste Renoir's Madame Léon Clapesson. I catch my breath, feel faint. I'm not certain I even know there's a bench behind me when my knees buckle, for Madame was the painting on my mother's easel that day.
I love that. I want to ask you about, it's really interesting to me because when you read those two sections, um, the voices sounded, all the voices of the characters in this book are so indelible and so different. Was that difficult to do? And did you read each section out loud to make sure that the voice sounded, out there in the air differently?
Um, it wasn't difficult to do. I just got into the characters, but I did read them a lot out loud. I tend to read almost everything I write out loud, for cadence specifically, just to make sure that I just do, because I have to make sure it sounds the way I feel like it sounds in here
Right.
when I'm writing it. But it wasn't really that difficult. I mean, it was just I just got into the character. It was like being an actress in a way, although I could never be one. Um, but you kind of take on that persona when you write. You take
Right.
on the character of each of your the persona of each of your characters. So I did that. I mean, I knew um, who Blue was very much, and I knew who Scarlet was, and Henry. I mean, he was
Henry is great.
fun to get into his character. He was the funnest for me. Um, he was kind of adult at times, not really,
Do you ever feel like you see your characters on the street?
Oh gosh, yes. I mean, do you do that sometimes? Um,
It's totally disconcerting.
yeah, I know it. I know it. But the parts where Scarlett's talking to Henry and she just can't stand him. Those were so fun to write. When she was like, "Oh my God," Dr. Henry, and
But you could hear her voice. It was so real.
yeah.
I have one final question for you, and if we have any other questions, pop them in the chat. My question for you is, how did you develop the suspense so that the novel starts, it hits just the right points, and towards the last 3/4, it starts speeding, like a speeding train, where I know I said this before, but it's true. I could not catch my breath because it was so good, and I could not tear myself away from the page. Was that was that just like cutting things down to the essentials, or was it just pouring out of you and you didn't do it deliberately?
Um, I think it was kind of pouring out, but I also think, there's editing there. Hopefully, I mean,
Right.
like I say, my Maya, she was very good about, it was sentence structure. It was, thinking a lot about a lot of kind of subject verb sentences, and maybe people don't notice that, but that kind of clip that happens when you just have
Right.
subject verb, and that
Right.
that kind of makes it go. And it's so funny because in writing sometimes, when I was getting my MFA in fiction, we were told don't do that, you have to mix up your sentences. But when you want to speed something up, you kind of have to do that repetitive sentence type short clipped. And so I used a lot of those when that ending was starting to happen, when it was building. And then, and I dropped a lot of conjunctions in places that, stuff that, and Maya was great at that. There's just, we don't need these, this can go, these words are enough. And so that was, it was a group effort. I mean, we really worked well together. And so I don't know. It just was, I was really into it. When you're writing and you're in a place that you're just really into the characters and you know what you're doing, and all of a sudden it's coming together. So yeah, you write faster, and it just kept coming. So
It was
yeah.
incredible. I mean, I felt like my breathing was matched to the words on the page, just
Yeah.
You know, so I want to point out that the Maya she's talking about is Maya Ziv, who is an amazing,
Amazing.
amazing editor, and also that her agent is Miriam Altschuler, who is just wonderful, and she's a friend of mine. But anyway, so
She is wonderful. You're not just
little
saying
plug, she is
totally
wonderful.
true. Yeah.
But anyway, I wanted to ask, can you talk at all about what you're doing next? I know sometimes writers
Um,
don't want to touch it yet.
I know I do have something going, and it's not the same, but it's a similar type of, I mean, I don't really like calling these thrillers, they're more like dramas, like, but then
Yeah, it's not a
psychological.
thriller. It's too
Yeah,
literary.
yeah,
Not that there
um,
aren't literary thrillers, but
but so, yeah, that I have a kind of a detective in this one, but she's not there. I mean, she's more like, how in, Scarlet and Blue, Henry becomes kind of the solver.
right,
So,
right, right.
this person, this woman is my solver in this book, and, I don't know, I don't wanna say too much, but I'm pretty into it, and I'm at that place that's really fun when we're as writers that you kind of, like, are, kind of testing out the waters for a while, and I'm at that
Right.
place where it's clicking, where all of a sudden it's starting to really come together in my head, and I'm writing, I'm also writing in my head, but I'm writing at the same time, and I know my story now, which is, I mean, I
That's
kind of knew it,
remarkable.
now I know it, and that's the good place to be when you're, and I think we all do that, we
We
just
do
finally
all
all of
do
a
that.
sudden know our story. So
Okay. Well, I want to remind everybody again, bookshop.org. You can, or just walk down to your favorite indie bookstore, buy this book, Scarlet and Blue. It literally is one of my favorite books of the year. I just could not stop reading it. It's just truly wonderful. I want to thank Jennifer Murphy for being here. I'm so delighted to meet you and to be able to talk about this book. To me, that's the best part of being at the Blaze. And I want to thank our producer, Karen Belovic, who is also a writer, for being just so great. And we'll see you all next time. So thank you so much.
thanks, Carolyn, so much for having me.